And welcome back to the Assembly Content Cabana here at Possible 2025. I'm Tyler Goldberg, Director of Political Strategy at Assembly Global, and I'm joined by Claire Nance from Activision Blizzard, as well as Jonathan Stringfield from Microsoft Advertising. Claire, Jonathan, so nice to have you.
Very excited to be here.
If you wouldn't mind each giving us a little introduction, what your role is, sort of how you got there.
Yeah, so I'm on the Activision Blizzard team. I work within the advertising team at Activision Blizzard. So if you are not familiar, Activision Blizzard is one of the world's biggest video game publishers. Some of our games, Candy Crush, World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, might have heard of it. Hopefully you have. And so I work within the ads team there, and really a lot of my job is helping brands, marketers, advertising understand gaming and understand how they can activate within it, kind of breaking down some of the myths there are about gaming. So really acting as this kind of like translation layer between the gaming industry and the ads industry.
Wonderful. And Jonathan?
Great. So I oversee revenue and business strategy at Microsoft Advertising. So that means a lot of things, but one of the things that I'm responsible for apropos to this conversation is nominally responsible for working with our gaming studios, such as Activision Blizzard and Xbox, to help them monetize through ads and set the tone for their overall strategy for ads monetization at Microsoft.
I mean, and one of the themes I've noticed here at Possible, as well as sort of emerging over the past couple of years, is that gaming is no longer niche. I've heard some very interesting stats about who is a gamer, and this sort of idea that we had of a gamer back in the day is just no longer true and probably was never true. So for the two of you, I guess this first question goes out to both of you. How are you seeing that intersection of like gaming is now just sort of an average part of your media plan? And I don't say average negatively, I say it as it's ubiquitous.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing this shift, right? Because gaming for so long sat within the innovation bucket. And we're kind of in this like innovation purgatory for a while where brands were really interested in gaming, but only as its innovation play. And I think we're seeing this shift now, like to your point, where we want to be part of the average media plan, right? Because it's shifting more into the mainstream. And gaming is more effective when you think of it holistically as part of a media strategy, rather than thinking of gaming in a silo and in this innovation bucket. And I think the reason why we're seeing this shift on the brand side and in the ad space is because there's this increasing education that's happening, where brands and advertisers are starting to understand more that yes, gaming isn't niche. You know, I think it's 3.4 billion gamers, 86% of the US population are playing games. You know, it's like fairly sizable chunk.
The average age is like 37 or something, right?
Yeah. Nearly 50% of women. One of my favorite stats I love to pull out is like 2 in 3 moms are gamers. You know, so that really surprises people. But it's those types of things. So we're starting to see this perception shift as people understand more about who gaming audiences are, how many people are playing, where they're playing. And so, again, the offset of that is that shift from the innovation bucket into the kind of mainstream, media plans.
That's really interesting. Jonathan, what about you?
And, I think some basic things have happened such that, a lot of the opportunities are coming by merit of more games and more platforms being internet enabled, and having it stop being something that had to be bespoke and coded directly into the game to something that could be inserted via programmatic technology or otherwise, right? So on a basis in terms of how advertising technology has developed, that's been highly accretive to gaming. On a broader note, you look at essentially how gaming as an entertainment platform has been more acculturated into consumers today, that again, average age somewhere between 35 and 37, and this is not just niche entertainment to them, this is the entertainment that they indulge in the same way that they would TV or movies or otherwise. So when you get to that point, advertisers have to start paying attention because look, this isn't niche, this is broad entertainment that your consumer is indulging in that much more. And then for the publishers themselves, and this is an important point, at Xbox, at Microsoft Gaming, we have this big, bold vision that we want to bring gaming to the joint community of gaming, specifically to every person on the planet. And for us to do that, we also have to adopt the ways in which other mass entertainment, like films and movies, have adapted. And that includes things like advertising.
That's fascinating. I mean, over almost half the world is gaming. That's really interesting. Claire, one thing we've been talking about, again, a sort of theme of a lot of our conversations, is advertising that is both seen and unseen at the same time. And what I mean is, you don't want to interrupt someone's experience. And I think especially on the gaming side, because it's not like TV where there's a commercial break. It's like a natural, I'm expecting to see ads a certain percentage of the time. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so I I think, one of gaming's superpowers is its, immersive nature. You don't need to try and break through and cut through and disrupt in gaming. You already have the audience's attention. And so it's really important that you maintain that attention. And so I really like to think of it through the lens of seamlessness. So when you're incorporating any kind of ad or brand experience into, doesn't matter what game or what type of activation, you want it to fit really nicely into that environment and feel like a seamless extension of the gameplay experience itself. You don't want it to be this like disruptive, and like we've all, you can play some of those mobile games where you get the spammy pop-up, like we've all played them, right? And you're trying to X out of it.
It's so small.
And you're like, I just want to finish my
It's
level.
a game in and of itself.
Yeah, I just want to finish my level, and and then you send you through to an app store, and you're like, what is happening? That's not the way. Wouldn't
That's
advise
bad,
that.
yes.
Wouldn't advise that. And so really for us, we think through this lens of like seamlessness,
right,
and also putting the player first. And by player first, we're like, what is the player experience when they are playing this game, and how do we make sure any ad experience is complementary to that? So not breaking the immersion, not being disruptive, but also being really player first in terms of how we bring anything to life. And obviously, like the net of that is that it's good for the player, yes. It's also good for the brands.
Yep.
You're going to see better results, and it's just going to be a much more impactful campaign and experience.
And I mean, Jonathan, Microsoft has really been at the forefront of this concept of sort of the monetization and sort of how we can take these great ideas and turn them into a successful ad strategy. One question I have, and I do a lot of work with political candidates and advocacy candidates, so obviously people who are very sensitive to brand safety and all that. I think over the past few years we've started to see every advertiser, like almost an unspoken rule, they don't even need to list it on their briefs. It's important to them. How do you all navigate, I would say, scalability with the intention of ensuring that brand safety is still achieved?
Yeah, I think there's many misconceptions around gaming, and not just misconceptions, but misunderstandings. And I actually think brand safety is one of the bigger ones. And what I mean by that is there is a tendency to conflate brand safety with brand suitability. So in terms of brand safety in the absolute sense, gaming is actually one of the most brand safe platforms in the world because we as the publisher control that experience, control the content moderation, control what is allowable in terms of brands and content and so on and so forth. So like this is not UGC, this is not things, or social media even, where there could be a lot of things that brands might not like that would be adjacent to their ads. That's not an issue. Now, brand suitability is different, right? And in that world, I think this is where folks get hung up, that there are going to be some brands where in an action-packed game, that does not align with their brand values, and that is okay. Because in those worlds, there is Candy Crush, right? There are things, we have chocolate rivers and rainbows and unicorns for them, right?
Color bombs.
And color bombs, and which, is starting to get close to action-y, but whatever. But then in a world of, for brands that want to lean into, the folks that might say, have an endorsement with like an action movie or what have you, then we do have things like Call of Duty or what have you. So like in that world, I think it is really funneled from this kind of vision of thinking about gaming as fairly monolithic and all the same, but realistically, and again to continue this theme that this is just like very broad entertainment in the same way that there are genres of movies or television or what have you that are all over the spectrum, same with games, which is a long way of saying that there is a game and an opportunity for every brand.
And I would add to that, it's really comes back to knowing, like at the campaign stage when you're doing the ideation and the strategy, like who are you trying to reach? What are you wanting to achieve? And really starting with that rather than starting with, I want to do something in gaming.
Yeah.
Right? And the more you can kind of anchor it in like, who's the audience I'm trying to reach? Because to Jonathan's point, you can reach probably every audience. It's just going to be in different games and different gaming platforms. So being really crystal clear on the objectives up front is really important.
And to put a finer point on that, saying I want to be in gaming is kind of saying like I want to be in TV.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. What about
I want to be in media.
Well, that brings me, and that's why I'm so glad I have both of you here for this question. I'm sure there's a temptation from above to maximize revenue here and sell every potential possible ad. But you also have to, you're charged with protecting the gamer's experience. How does that work? How do you have that conversation?
Well, I talked about this idea of being player first. And so we are first and foremost on the Activision Blizzard side, we are a game publisher. And what that means is the studios actually will not let us put bad ad experiences in the games. And to be clear, that is a good thing.
Right.
Because for them, like, player first, right? So we need to maintain that experience for the player. That is the most important thing. So the studios are very protective of that in a good way.
Right.
And so that means that any ad experience we put into that game is going to have that really nice balance of, yes, it's going to be effective and good for the brand, but it's going to fit really nicely into the game itself. And so taking that kind of, like, dare I say, kind of cautious or
Right.
careful or thoughtful approach is really how we find that balance. Because if you go too far one way, then you're going to lose what makes the game so special.
Sure.
And even, if I talk about a game like Candy Crush, which has been around for, I think, 12 or 13 years now, like, it's such a ubiquitous, title. And for a mobile game too,
Right.
to have that staying power. And that's because there's so much care and craft that goes into creating that game. And so we want to protect that. We don't want to lose that. And so how do we take the magic that comes from creating the game through that care and craft from the studio team and inject that into a brand experience for an advertiser?
Do you find that leads you to be working with the creative teams more often than if you were at a TV channel or something like that?
Absolutely. We actually have an in-house creative studio.
Interesting.
And they actually create the kind of mini games and do the creative execution for our clients. So that taking that lift away for again, one of the things we see with brands, sometimes they're a bit scared to get into gaming because they're like, oh, it's going to be this huge lift.
Right.
I don't have the resourcing, like, what's involved. And so our in-house creative studio team, like, they know what works.
Right.
So they've got all that knowledge. And
The hardest step is that first.
Exactly. They're able to pass that on. They're able to kind of input the best practices to come up with the creative activations, which takes the lift off from the brand side, but also makes it more effective and impactful on our side.
Absolutely. So I guess, Jonathan, then, on the other side of that, what does a successful brand partnership look like today? What makes it the best?
I mean, I think the point that I think we keep returning to, because I think it's pertinent, is that if you go to gaming and treat it, and I think there's the real danger that this is the way that it's looked at many brands and agencies and what have you, as a box you're going to check, well, then that's not going to set yourself up for success, right? Like, sure, you can find an opportunity, and sure, you may even get some ROI out of it, and sure, it might be kind of mildly interesting, but it's probably not going to be accretive in a way that other activities that may be on social or other forms of media that you have deep intentionality and also knowledge of these platforms come through. So where we have found the greatest success are the brands that aren't coming or don't have the disposition that they're just looking to check a box, but they're coming with a strategy, right? Now, to be clear, they might not know exactly how that strategy fits in this very large ecosystem, which we definitely don't have the expectation for them to be able to navigate, and that's why Claire and her teams exist. That's what we're here at Microsoft to do. It's to help navigate and connect from, okay, if you are looking to achieve XYZ, and that XYZ can be a wide range of potential objectives and audiences and what have you, we can figure out the right way to funnel to you. So it really comes from that sense of collaboration, which, again, I think to Claire's point, like working with the studios, working with the teams that work very closely with the studios, making sure that we are blending the message well or activating in a way that is accretive to the gameplay, because when that happens, it's going to be accretive to the audience. And when it's accretive to the audience, it's going to be accretive to the brand.
Absolutely. And I would imagine, and this is, again, one of the themes we've noticed in all of our conversations, but specifically in the gaming space, has been this idea of intentionality. People are there playing a game for a reason, and I think that allows you all to do half the work of targeting because you already know what consumer A is interested in based on what game they're playing. And so I have to imagine that gets you a more, again, not to overuse the word, a more intentional audience if I'm coming to you with a brand strategy proposal, because people who care about sports are playing game A versus other things. So I imagine that's made all of these partnerships more successful.
I mean, yes, and I think that what we're coming very close to is that there are, and I think Claire talked a little bit about it, that superpowers in gaming, how we relate to that media, they're very different from other forms of media. And like the simplest example is that, again, any marketer here, and we're at this conference where many marketers are talking about many challenges, and it's going to be like divided attention and how much different experiences across screens and so on and so forth. And gaming does not have that
That's
problem.
a great point.
Because when you are engaging with a game, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, you are engaging with mechanics in a deep way. So, like, yes, we can have a long conversation and an interesting one in terms of, the targeting and what we can do, and even, like, all of this stuff in terms of play behaviors that we can look at. But realistically, just as a baseline, when done well, the fact that the very psychology that is being directed at the platform is very different than other forms of media is in and of itself powerful. And I think the really smart brands are starting to get ahead of that.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that as well is the fandom piece, which we haven't
Yep.
touched on yet, which is not only is this an audience that's really leaned in, like to Jonathan's point about like that's where their sole attention is, but they also have really strong feelings about these games that they're playing, especially ones that have been around for a long time, like Call of Duty and Candy Crush. People feel a real strong connection to that IP because you're not just passively consuming it.
Right.
You're actively interacting with it. And we see this fandom and this passion that people have for these games exists on the platform, but it also extends off it. So you're also reaching people who are in a particular mindset and state emotionally, right? Not just that they're already highly attentive.
But they're like a fan of the brand, and that's
exactly.
IP,
and so there's some of that association.
What a
there.
fantastic conversation!
Well, they've been playing some of these games for upwards of a decade,
right?
And so, like, the point that I make with marketers is that, like, look, you'll be on platform XYZ in social media, and we don't need to name names, and people use it, and they may even like it, but they don't love it often.
Yep.
And players love games. And that is powerful, but that is also why we are very careful with these experiences.
I'm fascinated by the nitty-gritty of this, right? The formats.
Yeah.
What, in your mind, has been the most successful ad format that, again, does the job of advertising without being disruptive?
So we've done a lot of research into what game players receptive to in terms of ad formats. And when I'm going to talk about mobile space specifically, but the key themes that come out there is the ability to opt in. So I talked about those spammy pop-up ads before. Don't like that, but the ability to opt in, so having control over the ad experience, getting a reward for that time. So like in Candy Crush, again, as an example, like we have that rewarded video. So you get a color bomb or you get something for watching the ad. And the duration is the other piece, so that how long the ads go for. So when I think about what a really successful format, specifically in mobile, because again, Jonathan talked earlier about gaming is not monolithic, like there's so many different platforms or what have you. So for simplicity's sake, I'll focus on mobile here. The rewarded video format is really, really successful because it's incorporating all three of those elements that are really important to players. They are choosing to watch the ad, and then they are getting rewarded for that time. So we talked about the kind of feelings that people have. They're already feeling good because they're playing a game, and now they're getting rewarded. So that your brand is being associated with these feelings of positivity and enjoyment and engagement. So in the mobile space, that's a really impactful format, and it's also really easy for brands to activate within. It can be a very turnkey solution.
What, in terms of video length, I think that's really interesting too, because on one hand, you don't want it to be so short that you don't get anything out of it, but on the other hand, you don't want it to be so long that you're boring someone, they put their phone down or whatever and go get something. What do you think, and I'd like to open this up, Jonathan, as well, what are your guys' idea of the perfect ad format?
Yeah, I mean,
perfect ad length, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, generally around that 30-second mark. And again, we've done some research that Jonathan could talk to a little bit as well about when we think of this idea of attention. And you actually said it. We don't want people to be putting the phone down, right? And we've actually done research looking into what are people doing when that ad is there. Like, what is the position of that phone? And we actually found that they are not putting that phone down. They are keeping it at that kind of level, and so there's that sustained attention, right, even as the ad is playing, which was really interesting.
That's fascinating. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, and I think what Claire is speaking to is that when you look at gaming, because of the points that we've covered before, in terms of it being massive entertainment and so on and so forth, that means that as large as that ecosystem is, and I think is potentially intimidating as is to brands, it also means that there's bountiful opportunities. So Claire is really kind of nailing the point in terms of, look, we can get anyone activated this afternoon, right? Because we have like turnkey options of like formats that they're maybe running on other platforms, and they can run them within some of our games, household name games that have been around for decades. And in that world, they will probably, if not almost certainly, perform better than on other platforms. And that is 100% a route that they can and should take if that is what the strategy dictates. And there are other opportunities beyond that, right? There are opportunities that are around the gameplay experience within the Xbox console. There are opportunities that are outside the gameplay experience, like co-branded Xbox consoles in terms of like, movie integrations that we've done in the past. And the creative palette that gaming opens up is one that like it gives a lot of options for advertisers, but again, ones that are going to be fit to the strategy. So in these worlds where you do want to activate quickly and have things like video that is effective and these are the assets you use, we can absolutely do that, and we can do so much more depending on what the objectives you were trying to chase are.
A theme of mine today that I decided to make up today, I don't know, maybe it's the heat, is asking people, imagine the assembly content Cabana is actually a time machine. We're here at Possible 2026. What was the big brand innovation in the gaming space that shaped the past year?
I think the biggest shift and we're already starting to see this, and I suspect that we will see it become kind of more acute as it goes on, is this shift in gaming behavior where it's no longer on a singular platform. And we're seeing it really, people are playing across multiple platforms, and they're playing across multiple platforms throughout the day. And I think we're seeing this shift where it's people are playing where they want to play, how they want to play. So around this idea of access. And I think more and more we're going to see brands start to understand that. And so I talked a little bit earlier about thinking about gaming holistically as part of a broader media strategy. But I think even within a gaming strategy, thinking of it holistically there, where it's not just I want to reach mobile players.
Right.
Because those mobile players are also playing on console.
Right.
So how can you have a really integrated campaign that's actually reaching them at all these different touch points throughout the day and throughout the week? And so like that's the shift that I think we're starting to see, and I think we're going to see that continue further, and I think the opportunities within that cross-platform landscape are also going to increase.
That's fascinating, because if I think of someone, myself, and probably demographically similar to myself, I find myself playing mobile games in my commute in and out of work on the subway. That's when I do my mobile gaming. Or in the morning, and maybe console would be later in the day. So that's really interesting about sort of following that user across different platforms. That's fascinating. Jonathan, I guess first of all, do you agree? Which you're nodding your head, so I assume yes. And second, what do you think the next big thing is?
I mean, I 100% agree with Claire's point. And Xbox did a consumer campaign a few months ago, with the premise being that Xbox everywhere, right? And it was this thing that basically said, all these screens, that's an Xbox, this is an Xbox. What you're watching, this add-on is an Xbox. And the point they're making is that the direction that our platform for gaming is going is that basically any screen that can be connected to the commercial internet is an Xbox. So when you think about that, and you think about like what that means in terms of like the things that Claire was talking about vis-a-vis consumer journeys and where they're consuming media throughout the day, to my point before that like we want to reach every person on the planet with the joy of gaming. One, you need to make sure every screen is potentially a gaming screen, and that two, that those game players can do so flexibly. And that's really what we're trying to build at Microsoft more broadly. So I 100% agree with that point. And I think that when we talk about this capability to reach game players across all of these modalities, it's important not just because it does conform to the user experience, which it absolutely does, and I think it's good for our consumers, and therefore, as we've been talking about, good for advertisers. It is really answering what I know to be the case that advertisers have been asking for from the game industry, that like they want to reach gamers on phones, great, yes, but they also want the biggest screen in the household, and I think what we're uniquely building is the option to do that. And that is something that I think is certainly unique to gaming, but I think certainly unique to entertainment and media more generally.
Well, and I guess, and this is sort of a weird question, but I will say that...
Can't wait.
I can't wait. My wife and I last week went and we saw Pride and Prejudice re-released in theaters for the 20th anniversmy
I also watched Pride and Prejudice this last weekend.
I had never seen it. I had never seen it. Great. It was wonderful.
Classic.
My question is, it seems to be a theme in the movie space, is re-releasing old movies.
Sure.
Do you see a space where they may start doing that with older games?
Oh, they're already doing it.
Can I take this one?
I was going to say, I was going to throw it over to you. Yeah.
Debate.
So this is, it's not even going to
Jonathan, you're first up.
That's where, again, just like my inherent fanboyism gets to come out for a minute. Like, just this week, we released Oblivion Remastered, which was one of the most fantastic, it's a well-known Game of the Year type game that came out 20-some-odd years ago, and we completely remastered it and re-released it, and it's now one of the biggest hits this year. So objectively, the answer is yes.
Right.
And again, what is interesting about this is that we're in this world where we can start to look at games that have that degree of age to them, by
Right.
the way, and that there are consumers, adult consumers, that I played that game
Right.
as an adult, as a early professional, and it just re-released, and now not being an early professional, and I'm not going to say my exact age, I am just as excited.
Right.
And so again, these types of opportunities in gaming, one, match what's going on in the broader industry, but then two, really speaks to the power and durability of the fandoms and the IP and what have you, that like mechanically the game's not different.
Right.
We gussied up like the graphics and
Yeah.
everything
Sure.
to it. And all of a sudden, a new generation is seeing it, and then a generation that played it before is rediscovering it, and that's
And that
fantastic
goes to
in my
Claire's
mind.
point of you're not just following the consumer in their daily life,
Yeah.
but you're following them through their life.
Exactly.
Like you as an early
Correct.
professional,
Correct.
And it's
to still an early professional.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's call it that.
And it's the nostalgia piece, right?
Sure.
So my example of Jonathan's is I love Crash Bandicoot, which is an Activision game. Classic, played it when I was growing up, and Activision's done a few things. They have created new games using the Crash Bandicoot IP, so that kind of like extending the Crash Bandicoot universe, so to
Right.
speak. And they've also re-released, like to your point, some of the classic titles, but now with like the gaming mechanics are being updated. So
Sure.
you can still have that nostalgic experience of playing a game that for me, like I played growing up, but I'm not having to play it on this kind of really small, pixelated, like
need to blow
trying to
into
press
the
jump.
machine
to make CRT
yeah, blow the
television.
cartridge to see if it works. And so that gives me that real kind of like nostalgia kind of kick, right? And so like that's another piece. And again, because there's that fandom and that connection,
Right.
and I'm like, and now I get to experience this game that I've loved when
Yep.
I was younger, all these years later.
That's fascinating, especially as people our age start having kids of their own, and
Yep.
sort of just
And
like
you can introduce
Yeah,
exactly.
it's like,
Not for nothing, my kids are now playing Oblivion.
Right.
And like they were, my oldest was a baby when
Yeah.
it came out.
What about Crash Bandicoot? No.
that is
Sure,
that-
that too.
Thank you so much for joining me in the Assembly Content Cabana /2026 Time Machine. Hope you guys have a successful and great rest of your conference and your time here in Miami.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.